On the 4th of August 2025 in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, the Stade is packed with thousands of cheering fans. Samuel Eto'o walks onto the pitch. Alhaji Diop and Emmanuel Adebayo also were on the pitch. Then comes Burkina Faso's own football legend President Traoré and Charles Kabore. But there's something unusual about this match. Walking beside the football stars and members of Burkina Faso's armed forces, wearing football kits instead of military uniforms. They were not there to provide security, they were there to play match. It's an unforgettable sight, and it immediately tells you that this is much more than a football match, and this is a national celebration, because for the first time in 4 years, Burkina Faso's biggest stadium has reopened. 4 long years, the Stade de la Quatre stood empty. The national teams could not play there. That's it. The country's most important sporting venue had become unusable, and now it is a live match, and crowd is celebrating. The government is also celebrating. The army are also celebrating. But that raises an important question. How does a country fighting a deadly insurgency find the money, the workers, and the determination to almost completely rebuild its biggest stadium? Burkina Faso has spent years battling armed groups. It has faced growing international isolation. It's led by a military government that came to power promising a different future. So why make rebuilding a football stadium one of its biggest and most visible achievements? So to answer that question, we have to go back. Back before the closure, back before the crisis, and back to the day Stade was opened. So the Stade sits in the heart of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Construction began in 1981 with support from China. At the time, Burkina Faso wanted to build modern sport facilities that could serve the country for generations. You see, the stadium officially opened on July 18, 1984. The man who inaugurated it was Thomas Sankara, one of Africa's most famous revolutionary leaders. Even the name of the stadium tells a story. The 4th of August is a reference to August 4th, 1983, the day the coup brought Sankara to power. So from the very beginning, this was never just a football stadium. It became a symbol of a new government, a symbol of a country trying to build its own future. So over the years, it hosted some of Burkina Faso's biggest sporting moments. In 1998, it even hosted the final of the African Cup of Nations. And for millions of Burkinabè, this was more than a football ground. It was where the nation celebrated its victories. So it was where the Burkina Faso welcomed the rest of Africa. And it was the country's biggest sporting stage. But no stadium lasts forever. So as the years passed, the building began to age. The facilities became outdated, the infrastructure deteriorated. And by 2021, one thing had become impossible to ignore. Stade de Quatre was falling apart. Then came the setback. On March 2nd, 2021, the Confederation of African Football, better known as CAF, suspended the Stade de Quatre. The decision was a huge embarrassment for Burkina Faso. The CAF inspectors found problems almost everywhere. The pitch was in poor condition, the drainage system no longer worked properly, many of the seats were not even numbered, security arrangements did not meet international standards, and emergency access was inadequate. So the facilities for journalists and television broadcasters also fell below the required standards. So in simple terms, Burkina Faso's biggest stadium was no longer fit to host international football. Imagine a country's most famous landmark failing its own safety inspection And that is exactly what happened. And the consequences were immediate. Burkina Faso's national team, the Stallions, could no longer play competitive home matches in their own country. Instead, they had to host games in Morocco. Later, they moved some matches to Mali. Think about that for a moment. Imagine supporting your national team but never being able to watch them play at home. I mean, imagine your country's biggest football matches taking place hundreds of kilometers away from your home country. So that became the reality for Burkinabè fans. But the timing could not have been worse. At the same time, Burkina Faso was actually fighting a growing jihadist insurgency in the country. Violence was spreading across large part of the country like wildfire. Then came a series of military coups. Relations with ECOWAS became increasingly strained, and many of Burkina Faso's traditional Western partners also pulled back, with the countries facing security, political, and economic challenges all at once. And rebuilding a football stadium was hardly the biggest priority, or at least that is what many people thought, because rebuilding a stadium is difficult under normal circumstances. So rebuilding one while fighting a war, facing diplomatic pressure, and losing international support is something else entirely. So for that to happen, something had to change. Renovation work officially began in September 2021. But almost immediately, progress slowed. The project ran into funding problems, and there were also questions about who was actually responsible for managing the work. And months passed, then years passed. The stadium remained closed. The breakthrough finally came on December 4, 2024, during a meeting of Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers. The government approved additional funding to complete the renovation, but money was not the only decision made that day. President Ibrahim Traoré also gave a direct instruction. He ordered that responsibility for managing the project be clearly defined and strictly supervised. That may sound like a small detail, right? But it tells you a lot about how the government operates in Burkina Faso. Major infrastructure projects are not left to move through layers of bureaucracy. They are closely monitored from very top. Yes, and their success becomes part of the president's own political reputation. With fresh funding approved and tighter oversight in place, work finally accelerated. By the time the project was completed, Burkina Faso had invested about 15 billion CFA francs, and that's roughly about 25 million US dollars. It was one of the biggest public investment in sports infrastructure in the country's recent history. But that raises another question. What exactly did 15 billion CFA francs pay for? So what changed inside the Stade du Quatre? Let's start with the numbers. Before the renovation, the Stade du Quatre could hold about 29,800 spectators. After the renovation, that number jumped to 55,000, and that is almost double the original capacity. But adding more seats was only part of the project. The real goal was to fix every problem that forced CAF to suspend the stadium in the first place. The brand new playing surface was installed. The drainage system was completely rebuilt. Every seat was properly numbered, and the security system were upgraded. Emergency access routes were improved. New facilities were built for journalists and television broadcasters. And in other words, the government worked through CAF's list, one problem at a time. So think of it this way. This was not like repainting an old house. It was like replacing the roof, the plumbing, the electrical wiring, and even part of the foundation, while keeping the building standing. And by the time the work was finished, the The Stade was no longer just repaired, it had been transformed into completely modern stadium. April 23, 2025, Burkina Faso sport officials visited the stadium to inspect the renovation and access the progress. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for in Burkina Faso. On July 1st, 2025, CAF sent an official letter to the Burkinabè Football Federation, and the message was more than just an approval. CAF congratulated both the government and the Football Federation for what it described as their significant investment and commitment to developing football in Burkina Faso. And that was a major turnaround. Just a few years earlier, CAF had declared the stadium unfit for international football. Now, the same organization was praising the work that had been done. 3 days later, on July 4th, another important moment followed. The official CAF homologation certificate was presented to President Ibrahim Traoré by the Minister of Sports during a public ceremony. And that was not a coincidence. The government wanted the whole country to see it. By presenting the certificate directly to the president, the reopening of the stadium became more than a sporting achievement. It became a political achievement as well. And the message was so clear. This was a promise the government had made, and this was a promise it believed it had fulfilled. The certification itself also mattered, and CAF classified the Stade as Category 3 stadium, and that meant it was officially cleared to host major continental and international football matches once again. After 4 years of closure, Burkina Faso's national team had finally had a home. Then came the grand reopening. The date was not chosen by chance. It was held on August 4th, 2025, the very day the stadium is named after. It was a powerful piece of symbolism. The ceremony brought together some of African football biggest names. Samuel Eto'o was there, Alhaji El Dehoff was there, Emmanuel Adebayo was there. Burkina Faso's own legends Alain Traoré and Charles Kabore also returned to the pitch together. They played in a special exhibition match against a team made up of members of Burkina Faso's armed forces. And the match finished 1-1, but the final score was never the main story. The real message was in who was standing on the pitch. On the side were football legends, on the other were soldiers sharing the same field, wearing the same colors, representing the same country. And that was not an accident. It was carefully designed to actually send a message. And what message was that supposed to send? A message of unity, a message that Burkina Faso's national pride is carried not by its football heroes, but also by the men and women fighting on the front line. The reopening was not just about bringing football back. It was about showing the country and the world the image the government wanted the people to remember. So why does any of this matter beyond football? Because this story was never just about a stadium. Government has repeatedly said that despite the war, despite diplomatic isolation, and despite growing pressure from abroad, Burkina Faso can still build, build projects that meet international standard. And that is why the reopening mattered so much. And it was not only about bringing football back, it was about showing that the country could still deliver major national projects. Football also has a unique place in Burkina Faso, in a country divided by insecurity, politics, and conflict. Football is one of few things that can still unite people. And when the Stallion play, millions of Burkinabè support the same team. For 90 minutes, politics takes a backseat. That makes the national stadium much more than a sport venue. It becomes a place where national identity is put on display that if you look beyond Burkina Faso, you begin to notice a broader pattern across the alliance of Sahel states. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, major infrastructure projects are increasingly presented as symbol of national sovereignty. They are not described as ordinary public work. They are presented as proof that these countries can rely on themselves. In that context, a road is more than a road. A bridge is more than a bridge, and a football stadium is much more than a place where people come to watch a game. It becomes a statement about the country the government wanted to build.